He wasn't searching for anything that day. No big questions were weighing on his heart, no spiritual struggle pulling him in a different direction. Life was fast, loud, and full of distractions, just the way he was used to. The streets buzzed with movement, cars passing, voices rising, phones ringing. He had music in his ears, messages piling up on his screen, and thoughts jumping from one thing to another. That was his normal. Keep moving, don't stop, don't think too much. But sometimes, life doesn't ask for permission before changing you. It doesn't tap you on the shoulder, it just happens. Quietly, suddenly, and it happened to him on an ordinary street corner. He was walking like always, head slightly down, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, when something off to the side caught his eye. Not a flash, not a sound. The opposite, actually. Stillness. A man not drawing attention, not speaking, not standing. Kneeling, in the middle of a concrete sidewalk near a quiet building. Alone, head bowed to the ground, he was praying. A Muslim, he thought. Right here. No rug, no room, just a small space between the chaos. It wasn't the place someone would expect to see something like that. Not in a city like this. Not in the middle of a Tuesday. And that's exactly what made him stop walking. He didn't know why he paused. Something about that image just didn't fit into the rush of everything else. The man wasn't looking around to see who was watching. He wasn't rushing through it. He was calm, steady, focused, completely disconnected from the world, yet more present than anyone around him. In a world full of noise, this man was silent. In a world full of people chasing approval, this man was ignoring all of it. And for the first time in a long time, he felt small in the best way. He didn't know this man, but he envied his peace. That quiet confidence. That stillness in surrender. That depth in something unseen. He stepped back just a little, pretending to check his phone, but his eyes kept lifting. Something in his chest felt unfamiliar. Not heavy, not scared, just shaken, like a wall inside him had shifted slightly, not enough to break, but enough to let something in. He had always looked at public faith with a kind of judgment. Thought it was performance, show unnecessary. But this didn't feel like performance. This felt like purpose. Like it wasn't about people at all. It was between him and something higher. And watching that, he felt the noise inside him go quiet, even if just for a moment. He didn't speak to the man. He didn't need to, because that short, silent moment spoke louder than any words could. It made him ask questions he didn't know he had. Questions about peace, purpose, and presence. He walked away that day looking the same. Same clothes, same phone, same face. But something inside him had been stirred. Something real. Something he couldn't unsee. He didn't plan to notice anything that day. His routine was always the same. Walk fast, keep moving, focus on the next thing. The city around him buzzed with the usual energy, cars honking, people talking loudly on phones, street vendors calling out to passing strangers. He was used to it. The chaos didn't bother him anymore. It was just background noise to the life he had grown comfortable in. But in the middle of that routine, something interrupted his rhythm. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, almost too quiet to notice. But it made him stop walking without realizing why. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a man kneeling on the sidewalk, forehead touching the ground, completely immersed in prayer. No microphone, no crowd, no stage. Just a man in his moment. It felt out of place, but not in a negative way. It was strange only because it was so rare to see someone disconnect completely from everything around them in public. The man looked peaceful, unaffected by the people walking by or the noise surrounding him. He was present, fully present. And in that moment, something shifted in the observer's mind. He stood for a second longer, pretending to scroll through his phone while stealing glances. This wasn't something he usually paid attention to. Normally, he might have walked right past. But this time, the stillness pulled him in. It was powerful, not because it was loud, but because it wasn't. That quiet act of devotion stood in total contrast to the world around it. It made him question how someone could find such calm in a place so chaotic. The moment didn't feel forced. It didn't feel like someone trying to prove a point or make a statement. It was just one man doing what felt natural to him, no matter the environment. That was what struck him the most. The courage to disconnect. The willingness to stop everything just to reconnect with something higher. It made him wonder when was the last time he had slowed down for anything, without distraction, without excuses. And maybe for the first time, he realized just how much he was missing. The man praying on the sidewalk wasn't seeking attention. He didn't glance around to see who might be watching. He didn't hesitate or seem embarrassed about where he was. In a world where people are constantly performing for others, adjusting their words, posture, and tone to fit the crowd, this man was in a space entirely his own. There was no hesitation in his movements, no self-consciousness. He simply found a clean spot, faced a direction with purpose, and began to pray with full presence. His focus was so strong, it created a kind of invisible bubble around him, separating him from the noise of the world, yet not once disturbing it. That kind of sincerity is rare, especially in public. Most people filter themselves when they think someone's watching, but he was the opposite. He was free, grounded. There was a purity in his action that couldn't be explained, only felt. There was nothing showy about the way he moved, nothing theatrical or exaggerated. Every action felt deliberate, peaceful, and practiced, not rushed, not mechanical. He wasn't doing this for likes, for praise, or for validation. He was doing it because it meant something to him far deeper than anyone passing by could guess. To the man watching, this was unsettling in the best way. He had been taught, both directly and indirectly, that public displays of faith were awkward, maybe even unnecessary, that people should keep things like this private. But in this moment, watching a stranger fall into quiet prayer without caring who walked by, he didn't see awkwardness. He saw strength. He saw clarity. He saw someone so connected to what they believed. They didn't need the approval of the world to act on it. That was powerful. And in that silent realization, the observer felt something stir in his chest. Not confusion, not discomfort, but respect. Deep respect. This wasn't a speech, it wasn't a lecture. There was no one trying to convince him of anything. And that's what made it different. That's what made it stick. He had spent his life forming opinions about faith, belief, and public spirituality without truly observing it for what it could be. Real, quiet, and deeply sincere. What he witnessed in that moment was not a man trying to be seen. It was a man who would have prayed the same way, whether the street was full or empty. That truth hit harder than any words ever could. He stood there longer than he intended to. It began as a quick glance, just a passing moment. But something about that man in prayer made it hard to look away. It wasn't about the physical act itself, but the feeling it gave off. The calm, the discipline, the presence. As people rushed past on their phones and in their thoughts, this one man had disconnected completely. Not just from the noise, but from everything else. The contrast between the two worlds was so sharp, it was impossible to ignore. One world moved fast, loud, and anxious. The other lived through that one act of prayer, felt timeless, still, and quietly strong. The observer started to feel something shift within him. A discomfort, not with the man praying, but with himself. Because watching someone else so focused, so grounded, made him realize just how scattered he felt. He was always rushing, always online, always thinking about the next task, the next post, the next obligation. But this man, he wasn't multitasking. He wasn't halfway in and halfway out. He was fully there, forehead on the ground, every motion carrying meaning. And it hit him that maybe this is what he'd been missing. Not religion, not ritual, but presence. Real presence. The simplicity of it made it even more powerful. No one had to explain it. No signs, no slogans, no debates. Just a quiet act that spoke for itself. There was humility in it, a kind of surrender that didn't feel weak, but noble. Like this man had figured out something most people overlook. That there's strength in stillness. That real peace doesn't come from having everything, but from letting go of everything else, even for a few minutes. And the man watching had never done that. Not once. Not truly. He started asking himself questions. What does that kind of calm feel like? What does it mean to be so rooted in something that you carry it with you wherever you go, not just in private, but out in the world, without shame? He didn't have the answers yet. But for the first time in a long time, he wanted to find out. Because in that silent moment, the man who thought he had everything realized he might be missing the one thing that actually mattered. The man praying never said a word, yet it felt like he was speaking the loudest in a crowd full of noise. There was no dialogue, no introduction, no invitation. Just an action so sincere, it echoed in the mind of the one who stood watching. It wasn't a dramatic scene or a planned display. It was a moment that unfolded naturally, with raw simplicity. But sometimes, the most powerful messages come from the things that are never spoken. And that's exactly what happened. That silent act of devotion carried weight, meaning, and beauty, not through sound, but through presence. As the man moved through his prayer, his hands lifted, his body shifted, and his forehead returned to the ground again. There was rhythm in it, but more than that, there was reverence. Every movement looked intentional, like it had a purpose beyond the physical. It didn't feel robotic or forced. It felt like something deep inside him was being expressed through quiet gestures. And somehow, the one watching could feel that. Even though he didn't fully understand it, it didn't matter that he didn't know the language or the details of the prayer. What he understood was the sincerity behind it. And sincerity has a language of its own. It bypasses explanations. It goes straight to the heart. The observer didn't need to be told what the man believed. He could feel it. He didn't need to hear a sermon or read a book to recognize that what he was witnessing was something real, unshakable. It stirred something inside him that had been asleep for a long time, something he hadn't even realized was missing. And all it took was a moment of watching someone completely surrender without saying a single word. The world around them didn't stop. Cars passed, footsteps echoed, conversations continued. But in that small space, a different kind of atmosphere had formed, not just around the man praying, but inside the one who watched. It was like time slowed down just enough for him to feel something unfamiliar, yet comforting. And when the man stood up and quietly walked away, he left behind no trace, no name, no introduction. But what he did leave was a question burning in the heart of the man who had watched. A silent question, heavy with meaning. What kind of faith gives that kind of peace? He had his own thoughts about faith. They weren't loud, but they were firm. Ideas shaped over years, influenced by headlines, conversations, and passing impressions. He never hated religion, but he didn't feel it was for him either. It seemed distant, complicated, sometimes even divisive. And when it came to Islam, he had his assumptions, not hateful, but definitely uninformed. So when he saw a Muslim man praying in public, his first reaction was curiosity, followed by a quick attempt to look away, to act like it didn't matter. But it did. Something about that moment wouldn't let go. As he watched, what challenged him most wasn't the man's faith itself, but the way he carried it, confident, quiet. There was no fear in his posture, no apology in his movement. He prayed with a kind of strength that didn't need to prove anything to anyone. And that was what caught him off guard. He had always believed that public acts of belief were about showing off, about making a statement or claiming superiority. But this man wasn't showing off. He wasn't even looking around. It was as if the entire world around him had disappeared. And he was somewhere else entirely, even though his body was right there on the sidewalk. It made him rethink everything he thought he knew. If someone could be that sincere, that at peace, without asking for anything in return, maybe he had misunderstood faith all along. Maybe it wasn't about rules and labels. Maybe it was about connection. Maybe it was about truth that couldn't be explained in a sentence, but could be felt in a moment. And in this case, a moment was all it took to break through years of silent judgments. He didn't feel attacked. He didn't feel like someone was trying to change him. That was the beauty of it. This wasn't a debate. There was no argument being made. Just a man doing what he believed in. And sometimes, the absence of pressure creates the perfect space for a heart to listen. The stereotypes in his head didn't match the reality he saw in front of him. And while he didn't walk away fully transformed, he walked away changed. Because the belief he witnessed didn't demand his agreement. It simply invited his reflection. He walked away from that moment thinking it would fade like everything else in his busy life. But it didn't. It stayed. Quietly, subtly, like a small spark waiting for stillness to be noticed. That simple act of prayer he witnessed on a sidewalk kept replaying in his mind. Not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. It was quiet, unshaken, peaceful. And that peace kept tugging at something inside him. It wasn't about the religion itself, not yet. It was about the feeling he couldn't explain. A kind of stillness he had never experienced, but now deeply craved. That moment hadn't demanded anything from him, yet it changed how he saw everything. Days passed. He went back to his usual routine, but nothing felt quite the same. The noise of life didn't hit the way it used to. The things he chased, validation, success, distractions, suddenly felt thinner, less satisfying. It wasn't like he turned into someone new overnight, but something had been awakened. A seed had been planted, and all it took was that single, quiet moment where he witnessed faith lived, not preached. No one tried to convert him, convince him, or pressure him. And yet, his heart had moved in a way it never had before. He found himself wanting to understand, not out of obligation, but out of genuine curiosity. What gave that man such calm in a chaotic world? What allowed him to carry his worship so confidently in the middle of a noisy street? He started to search, quietly, privately, watching videos, reading articles, listening to conversations he once ignored, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. That one act of sincerity had unlocked a hunger for meaning, not flashy meaning, but real, rooted understanding, something stable, something pure. And in time, he realized it wasn't just about watching someone pray. It was about witnessing someone connected to something higher in a way that made the rest of the world feel smaller. That moment had exposed a truth he hadn't been ready to see. That faith, when lived honestly and humbly, doesn't need to be explained. It speaks for itself. And the most unexpected part of it all was this. He had spent so long avoiding conversations about belief, only to be completely changed by someone who never said a word. What began as an ordinary day in a busy city turned into a turning point in the heart of someone who wasn't even looking for change. No words were exchanged, no deep conversation took place. Just one man, a stranger, offering his devotion in the middle of a sidewalk, quietly, sincerely, without seeking attention. And yet, that simple moment created a ripple that went far beyond what either of them could have imagined. It reminded us all that sometimes, the most profound impact doesn't come from speeches or arguments, but from silent truth, lived with conviction, practiced with peace, and witnessed with an open heart. That prayer, that stillness, that unwavering connection to something beyond the world, spoke louder than 1,000 voices. In a time where people often debate, divide, and defend, one silent prayer did something greater. It invited reflection. It softened a heart. It cracked open a mind. It proved that sincerity is more powerful than force, and presence more moving than persuasion. It showed that true faith isn't measured by how loudly we speak it, but by how quietly and consistently we live it. Sometimes, that's all it takes. One moment of truth, lived with humility, to change the direction of someone's soul. Thank you for joining this journey. Thank you for watching with your heart, not just your eyes. And most of all, thank you for giving space to a story that proves real change doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes, it begins with a whisper between a person and their creator.